Well, for some, it is difficult to stay at home, just like that of the Minister of Social Development in South Africa.
Stay at home if you can. I'm finding it difficult to stay at home. Virus, just go away. Please leave us alone. We have a life to live.
Of course, you can call us on 011 714 6842 and tell us what you think of that last clip as everybody tries to get through this time of quarantine during COVID-19. All right, well, continuing, we're going to be speaking to Mr. Lukhona Mnguni. He's going to be taking us through, of course, more COVID-19. Firstly, let's have a look at our political leaders as we have a look at this clip. As the numbers also would rise, the spotlight is also on the political elite, specifically at this time, and leaders of governments around the globe on the role that they play to educate and implement some of the measures that are taken by the respective countries. Well, to discuss this in particular, we are now joined by Mr. Lukhona Mnguni. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you very much for your time. Well, you have certainly observed the conduct of politicians around the world during this time. What is your observation?
Well, good afternoon to your listeners. I think the politicians are faring differently depending where you are. The thing that we are observing, those who are following responses of political leaders across the globe, is how soon do they act? Do they wait for some pattern? Do they wait for a number of cases to emerge before they are off to act? And what is the cost of not acting? But I think something else lingers in my mind besides just the timing at which politicians act. It's also the question of political legitimacy. So before this coronavirus outbreak crisis, how much political legitimacy did some political leaders enjoy? And it seems to factor in when you look at social responses of the citizenry when they are told what to do, and then they seem almost defiant, as though they don't have enough respect for the leadership or for the command that they are being given by the leadership. And I think in some instances, this is what has led to a number of countries having to have lockdowns or some form of state of emergency because of a realization that citizens are not responding in a cooperative manner towards political leadership. And I think it pegs around issues of political legitimacy, it pegs around issues of political activism among citizenry, levels of consciousness among citizenry prior to the crisis. And I think all of those things have now combined in how we see, one, how political leaders respond to the crisis, and secondly, how citizens respond. And there's at times a mismatch if you look at a country like Italy and how citizens were almost sort of defiant going on parties and all of these things. And, you then had to have an entire national lockdown, which meant those who had been roaming the streets defying government and might have picked up the virus were now going back to their homes to infect much more vulnerable people, such as the elderly. And then that precipitates the type of crisis that you see today in that country. Equally here in South Africa, there are people who are out and about in churches today. They are not heeding the call of social distancing and minimizing movement. Instead, they are adopting quite a defiant approach that, we will go to the church, we cannot stop exercising our faith, as though their faith is dependent on them being in a church establishment to be exercised. And some people have overplayed on the question of gatherings not to be more than 100 people. They say, well, we are 70, we are 80, as though the virus needs you to be 100 minus 1 in order for you to be safe. So it's all those issues and how citizens are responding. And I think as much as we focus on how leaders are responding, it's important to focus on how citizens themselves are responding as well.
Definitely. Are they walking the talk? Well, let's listen in now to a clip from Minister of Defense in Zimbabwe on COVID-19.
Economy yawe yakuchema handitendi iri kuvari kutichemedza. Trump ngaazive kuti haasi Mwari. Muri kuda kuti tisvinwe tiendepi? Chimbosvinwaiwo necorona virus. zvinita.
Well, let's hone in on that, Lukhona. Of course, the defense minister there from Zimbabwe making references to the world economy, saying that they somewhat deserve this, also making reference to Trump. Let's have a look rather, or hone in on some of the words that have been passed by political leaders recklessly with regards to COVID-19.
You mean the speech of leaders?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think the biggest one that is a talking point would be Donald Trump's most circulated response in how he labels it, the Chinese virus, and the irresponsibility of leadership at a time when the world is looking for solutions and not wanting to be sidetracked by polarizing statements that could actually do more harm in giving responses. It could do stereotyping in society, but also it just removes our attention as a whole to debate side issues at a time where we should be strengthening our responses, strengthening our social education, strengthening capacity of local institutions where we still can before a massive outbreak in some of the areas. But also, I mean, the more recklessly leaders behave, I mean, you played a clip earlier of Minister Lindiwe, for example. The more leadership appears to be reckless, the more it induces a sense of defiance in the citizenry, because in some citizens they are looking, what are the ministers doing, what are the political leaders doing, and if they don't feel that they are walking the talk, then they're like, well, then why should I care? Why should I suspend my action and my active life if the politicians are still roaming the streets and going about their business, or if they are speaking in this way that doesn't demonstrate urgency of the matter at hand? Mm-hmm. And so that becomes very important to continue to send the point home to political leaders that at this time of crisis, restraint is important, responsibility is important, and of course we do know that for some political leaders, this is a lot to ask for, but perhaps it's temporary, that they must just behave in a manner that supports the actions of various governments to respond to this crisis.
Speaking of response to the crisis, we do know that in general, South Africa has been criticized, of course, for its poor health facilities, as well as also noted quite frequently the infrastructure, the lack of capacity that our current health system currently has with the existing pandemics faced here in the country. Can we now possibly say in the South African context that the health policies of governments and I suppose of across the globe have now somewhat been exposed?
Well, look, I think the South African reality is known to all of us. As you mentioned, inadequate infrastructure. I mean, some people have discussed whether we've got a patriotic or an unpatriotic civil service and all of these other things. But what is more important now is how quick and how soon are we able to strike certain pacts that will give us capacity to respond to the crisis. And what are those pacts? We know that the public health system is in dire straits. So what becomes the role of the private sector in the health sector to help bridge those gaps that are there? How do we see private sector providing certain resources? Where are the construction companies, for example, to put up temporal structures in districts and local municipalities where public health facilities are quite broken and not helpful? How do we get some people to fund retired doctors and nurses to come into active service, make sure they have protective gear, they get compensated for that? I think now, more than just concerning ourselves about the reality that is there insofar as the brokenness of some of our systems, it's more about how do we rally behind that broken system and jack it up in a way that it is able to respond once we have a massive outbreak that touches countrywide. Of course, we are hoping that the measures that are put in place by government and the measures that will continue to be put in place by government and society cooperating with those measures will help us avoid. But in an instance where we don't avoid, I mean, if you look at our growth curve, it's quite worrying that at some point internal transmissions are going to be in an uncontrollable state, as you have seen with the Free State matter, where people attended a church service, as you have seen with the news coming out from the South Coast in Margate, where someone tested positive, they are asymptomatic, they've been back from Germany for 3 weeks, and they really went to test because the president on Sunday, when he was talking to the nation, advised that people had traveled to these countries in Europe and the US must test if they traveled mid-February. So the person went to test. So you've got all those low-hanging fruit issues, tourists in East London, outside East London, and all of this being reported to be traveling, and someone they tested positive. So these internal transmissions, you are going to get to a point where you can no longer identify where they are going to happen and where they might not happen, and then that's when your outbreak will be. But our duty now is to focus and put pressure on those who have resources in society to come to the fore and offer those resources. To continue saying that our system is broken will not help us. We must put pressure on those with resources to avail their resources to make sure that we are ready and prepared to respond to this pandemic whenever it breaks out in massive leaps and bounds in our country.
Thank you very much for your time this afternoon, Ms. Lukhona Mnguni, political analyst, talking about the role that political leaders are specifically needing to play at this point in time with COVID-19 in South Africa.